At least now we don't have to think as much about him in the context of the fact that now, like, Biden's pro-Israel Zionist agenda isn't like the concern, and now it's going to be Trump's super mega ultra pro-Israel Zionist agenda. I wonder. I've been seeing some melting down over this. By the way, there have been some. Part of it is the weird internet neo-Nazi isolationist crowd, and part of it is like people who I would consider stupid but principled in their stupidity, who are shocked that Donald Trump has put neocons in his cabinet. Like, the only consistent position across all of the cabinet picks has been that they are all pro-Israel. It's the only consistency. He has nut job Russian stooges like Tulsi Gabbard. He has full-on like anti-Russia war hawks. He's got neocons. He's got like everyone on there. But even with regards like loyalty, RFK Jr.'s loyalty was up for sale. You know, he essentially offered it to the Republicans conditionally. It's not true loyalty. You know, Trump just took him because why not? Why leave that on the table? The only real consistent position is Zionism. Even Tulsi Gabbard, yeah, I know. You'd think like Tulsi Gabbard, wow, she's so anti-war. No, she's pro-Israel. Part of this being because she's like a huge Islamophobe, which is a position held by some of the other people in his cabinet as well. Do you think the pro-Israel stuff is the coincidence? Is a coincidence? No. How on earth could that be? No, of course not. She has no beliefs whatsoever. Well, I mean, yeah, but you know, why do you think they're all pro-Israel? I've had to talk about this like a million times. I feel like because a lot of people are very authentically curious about it, but it's also one of those topics where people tend to dog whistle a lot. But I know a lot of the internet neo-Nazi types are saying like Trump betrayed us. You know, we didn't think Trump would be pro-Israel, even though for his first term he was entirely pro-Israel, and also he was like, you know, he picked Zionists in his cabinet back then as well, and this time he did as well. Like, we've been betrayed, we've been backstabbed. Trump did the thing he said he was going to do this entire time and has been doing for like 8 years. Why is that the most important thing for Trump? And it's not the most important thing for Trump. I'm pretty sure there's like varying info about Trump himself being anti-Semitic, but in like the 1980s businessman kind of way, like I want them doing my accounting work kind of way. I think there was a quote attributed to him on that, but it was from a while ago. I don't know. It's literally just the military industrial complex. You know those old it's like the saying, anti-Semitism is the fool's socialism. You identify a bias in society, which is that like, okay, and especially with Israel, man, because like basically every media outlet will not report on Israel. Honestly, they will either ignore critical information, frame everything extremely disingenuously. They'll use the passive voice. They'll say shit like journalists died in crossfire when like what would actually happen is like Israel just shot them. You know, there's like the media is obviously being controlled, or at the very least like directed in a sort of like general sense, towards viewing things from a specific outcome. I mean, it's one of the most blatant examples of manufactured consent that I think has ever existed in like the modern world, in the West, I should say, in the West, because manufacturing consent under dictatorial regimes, which we're maybe about to enter, is a lot more common. You know, if you go over to Russia, it's not like in Russia you can have like a balanced media diet. Is it worse than Iraq? Genuinely, I think it might be kind of like parallel. I think it might be kind of tit for tat. Because the media did the same thing with, hey, and we're going to talk about the military industrial complex. So Iraq is a pretty clear like parallel to that, you know. Anyway, you identify this like, wow, why is every single powerful person and every single corporation, all the news and everyone, why have all of them seemingly sworn fealty to Israel? And don't get me wrong, like there is very much like a strong Israel first tendency. Trump can criticize America, can call it a trash can. Will he say that about Israel? Nope. He'll say that about a lot of other countries, not Israel though. Basically, no politician will. They won't even offer minor criticism. You know, Rashida Tlaib did, and she got censured by members of her own party. Why? Folks, again, this is what who is that quote from? That anti-Semitism is the fool's socialism? Because obviously the Nazi response to this to say like, oh, it's the JQ. But that actually makes no sense if you think about it for like 5 seconds. First of all, in the logic of the Nazi, the left is supposed to be the agent of civilizational destruction that Jewish people put forward, except the left in this case are extremely anti-Israel. So how does that work? You know, how does that track? I mean, it's not like Jewish people in America all voted for Trump either. I think they came out majority for Biden by a pretty significant proportion as well. It doesn't really make sense in that context if you think about it at all. And likewise with Trump, then why then do so many Nazis like Trump when Trump is so aggressively Zionist? Is it because Israel's a buffer for Iran? No, it's the military-industrial complex. It's like what we've seen so many times before with cultural issues being weaponized to avoid talking about economic ones. It's the same basic logic, you know, where racial agitation will be developed to prevent black and white people from working together to, you know, fight and build a union. You take a wedge issue. We live in a democracy for now. Apparently, you need votes to win, and the military-industrial complex, which when I say that, by the way, like we are talking a literally like trillions of dollars spread out across a wide range of industries. The Department of Defense is the largest employer in the United States, and there are so many companies tied up in the manufacturing of everything that goes into the production of the weapons and support systems and the logistical devices that are necessary to maintain the American military. Like, why do you think that budget grows year after year? Why do you think people like Donald Trump will be budget hawks or pretend to be budget hawks, but no one even talks about cutting the military budget? It's taboo. Is that the JQ? Dude, Eisenhower warned us. It's the damn military-industrial complex. You have tens of millions of people directly and indirectly employed as a consequence of, you know, the Department of Defense and everyone that's associated with them. And you have to focus on a wedge issue from their perspective. If you can't focus on a wedge issue, if the military-industrial complex wants to win an election, if they want to bias the results of an election, what do they say to the public? Hey, we should be more in favor of war. We should spend more money on war. We should send more children to die. What's the winning message there? No, of course not. You have to bury the winning message in an issue that's harder to attack. Likewise, if you're a wealthy business person, you can't come out there and run on, we should gut unions and also people should make less money. You have to go through like an adjacent issue. You have to talk about like immigrants stealing jobs to crush the border, or you have to talk about like, you know, right to work laws, which is the euphemism, of course, that Republicans settled on in order to crush unions across the United States. Right to work, or right to be fired, would be a more accurate name for the policy. It's been adopted in a bunch of red states. Speaking of, the Pentagon just failed another audit. What is that, 4 or 5? 100? Yeah, they'll never pass an audit ever. So much money gets lost in the into the Pentagon. Just 7 poured into the drain, and we'll never see it again. And it goes to a lot of people, and a lot of people make a lot of money off that. Anyway, it's the same with Israel. So how do you front a pro-war agenda, right? How do you do that in the modern world? Imagine you're a guy, and your name is John Mid, military-industrial complex, okay? Imagine your name is John Mid, all right? And you are worth a lot of money, and you have a lot of power, okay? And you want your interests to be represented. And your interests are keep the machine going, bloat the budget, keep Americans fearful about war so they are okay with the military growing and growing and growing nonstop. Wouldn't his name be Mick? Yeah, but that's a slur for Irish people. Is that a slur? Or is that just like an affectionate term? It is? Okay. Go with John Mid for now. It's a light slur. It's a light slur. Let me finish the damn point. The point is, if you're John Mid and you are trying to win an election, you're trying to get your preferred candidate in there, how do you package all of these objectively socially harmful ideas, policies, budget practices in a way that people will vote for? Well, you have to, I mean, think about it. 80 years ago, you had a pretty easy job doing that, didn't you? Right? Because 80 years ago was the Cold War. You don't have to do a lot of work to convince Americans to be militant in favor of the development of the military-industrial complex when the Cold War is happening. And then you get all these other examples. 80 years ago was before the Cold War. I should ban you. 80 years? So right at the end of World War II? You're gonna get me on this? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, World War II was a terrible time to be a person invested heavily in the military. You just seek to distract me. Sorry I said 80 and not 70. The point stands. God, you're annoying. You don't have to do a lot of work to convince people to keep the machine running. One of the big controversies, one of them, during the Bush administration was that they would offer no-bid contracts to, well, a variety of industries associated with the invasion of Iraq, obviously Halliburton, oil and gas, and they all tie together, obviously. This is where the narrative that America will do anything for its oil comes from, but that's also kind of like idiot socialism, isn't it? America will invade anywhere for oil. That's not really what was happening. A lot went into that, but for the most part, it was just the fulfillment of a desire to reassert power in the region. But then you have an issue. How do you convince Americans to continue to vote for candidates who want to develop the military-industrial complex, who want to keep funding it, building it up, whatever? Because after the Iraq War, people are like, Americans are done with war. The Cold War ends, Operation Desert Storm goes relatively well. Then you have the Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan. Americans are now sick of war. Now we're all isolationist. We don't want to invade. The most we can do is drone strikes, which of course Obama does extensively. Trump continues the drone program. How do you get people invested? Folks, I got it. Israel, for decades has been a wedge for our geopolitical interest in the Middle East. They have been our tool in, asserting our will in the region. But if you look at the history of American presidents and their interactions with Israel, we didn't really like them that much. We also didn't support them that much. But now, now we're ride or die. They can do whatever they want. Literally, there's no line they can't cross. UN literally just said that their behavior is consistent with the behavior of a genocide. It doesn't matter. And the reason for that is because there's so much money tied up in the industries that are associated with Israel and their behavior over in the Middle East. It's been an effective wedge, or like an effective focus point for all of these industries and all of these individuals with all their biases and moneyed connections to centralize power around. It has nothing to do with Jews at all. It has less than nothing to do with Jews. That's just the cynical defense that they invoke. That's like you're criticizing us, you're anti-Semitic. You must think that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself, something, right? Like that. But that's the point, right? Rather than like Israel that had become the focal point, if we were instead doing the same thing with, Syria, with the Assadist regime, the military-industrial complex puts in a bunch of contracts and they develop a relationship, and then they go to war, and then American politicians are convincing American voters to go and get really invested in the defense of Syria. No one would care. We don't really have those connections, We didn't majorly support Israel at all until the Yom Kippur War anyway. Yeah, well, I mean, it's increased massively over time, but that's exactly the reason why everyone is invested to the extent that they are. There's a reason why the entire political class, the entire capital class, all of them have fallen in line. And it's because they're ultimate, and this is what AIPAC is in large part, right? AIPAC obviously doesn't care about anti-Semitism. If they did, they would have issued criticisms for the bajillion connections the right wing has to Nazis, and not be screaming about how left-wing college students peacefully practicing their right to protest somehow threaten the existence of Jewish people. It's all disingenuous horseshit designed to keep us invested. And maybe Donald Trump doesn't start any new wars, but whatever Israel's doing, both currently and in the future, that's tied to us. That money, that investment, that comes from us, from the American taxpayer. It goes into the weapons that are developed for them. It goes into their arms industry, which is heavily tied to ours. The connections are incredibly extensive, and it's not difficult at all to find them. American police being trained over by the IDF, modern tech, like security turrets that will auto shoot at faces via software, being trained on the fences around Gaza prior to October 7th. And why hasn't the industrial lobby rallied behind Ukraine? Because we're supporting them with weapons. We're giving them old weapons, not new ones. Also, we don't have the same ties to Ukraine that we did with Israel. Ukraine has been more or less like a second world dead zone for a while now, since the end of the Cold War, whereas Israel, we've developed literally decades of extensive ties. As a consequence of them being a proxy, now it feels like we're the damn proxies. Now it feels like the United States is at their beck and call. Why? The capital class. Doesn't really have anything to do with Israel. Us doing what Israel wants has as much to do with Israel as it does to do with America, which is to say, not much at all. It's not really a representation of the actual will or interest of the American people or the Israeli people. It's just You know what they say? Socialism is the socialism of wise people. Vosh is being so blackpilling on this issue. It's literally just what Eisenhower said, and also Marxism. And there are going to be a bunch of like internet neo-Nazis who are going to grimace every time they see Donald Trump because they don't understand. They don't know. They don't understand the nature of the issue. Don't Israelis benefit from colonialism? You've missed the point of what I said entirely. I'm only talking about the reason why it seems like American politicians can't criticize Israel. They can't criticize Israel because the capital class is aligned behind Israel. That's it. Not just the Israeli capitalist class, you know, Americans too. The powers that be and everything. And it's not even remotely conspiratorial to say this, by the way. The real conspiracy, because some people have like an attitude on this where they say like, well, no, everyone is honest all the time and no one ever lies in coordination, and please ignore all the evidence to the contrary. People are lying like in like almost unprecedented way. We saw this during the Iraq War. How can you in retrospect evaluate what happened in the lead up to the Iraq War? All of the lying, all of the like nonstop, like day after day, the news media being collaborative in the Bush administration's blatant efforts to misrepresent information and gun up for a war in Iraq. You know, like that. How do you explain that? Well, obviously, these people have connections, you know? No one wins a war without having ties to some newspapers. You know, you have to maintain those contacts in order to properly like develop the information. Yeah, it's always been like this. Remember, Vietnam was the very first time that Americans truly felt jaded about our soldiers and what they were doing abroad. And that was because independent journalists went over to Vietnam and started like directly recording, interviewing, taking pictures, so on and so forth. It was a break with a like concentrated media effort to represent what before that happened in Vietnam, people were largely in favor of it. Or at the very least, there weren't the same level of protest. Public opinion turned because there was a shift in how media was presented. But of course, the MIC adapts, and then that gets folded in as well. You know, you no longer have those like critical perspectives being offered. This time with Gaza, it's been TikTok. They literally said it. Remember when Mitt Romney said in that interview, like when they were talking about potentially banning TikTok, he was literally said like, you know, all that anti-Israel stuff on there. TikTok, YouTube, whatever, modern, decentralized, independent media is doing again now what it did back during the Vietnam era, which is briefly introduce like a schism in what is otherwise a completely uniform narrative that has been built up for people in order to encourage us to vote in favor of the interests of the MIC. How do you counter people dismissing your beliefs by calling them a conspiracy theory? I think talking about the Iraq War is a good one because now we currently are having this talk over Israel and Gaza, but people have mostly abandoned the Iraq War as like a defensible point, you know? So, but the problem is when people look back on the Iraq War, all they talk about is Bush lied, we shouldn't have been there. Okay, granted, we'll take that, sure. But like, Bush wasn't the only one that lied. The entire media class fell behind. There were like you could not be anti-Iraq war. Everyone knows about the Dixie Chicks getting canceled for condemning the invasion of Iraq, but like it went beyond that. Professors being fired, journalists being blacklisted, a complete uniform rejection of any counter narrative. This has happened only a few times, and every time it has to do with a war. It's the same group every time. And it has nothing to do with oil, and it has nothing to do with Zionism or Jewish people. It just has to do with whatever narrative can best be weaponized to suit that purpose. But if people accuse you of being conspiratorial, first of all, I encourage you, look up some of the like retrospectives on the media environment during the Iraq War and really ask yourself, like, was that organic? Just all of these people, conservative, liberal, relatively independent, more orthodox, old, young, across every board, everyone in the media class, all of them, I'm overstating the case a bit, not literally all of them, but damn near all of them, fell in line. Meanwhile, the anti-Iraq war protests were the biggest protests, one of the largest protests in American history. And they happened all over the world. Did the media cover that? No. You'd have to be a fool to look at that and think that was organic, basically. You would have to be a fool to look at that and think like there wasn't some behind the scenes meddling. And again, like the idiots will look at that and say, oh, it's a given ethnic group. And it's like, come on, man. It's 2024. Be a socialist already. There's an easier answer that's obviously correct here. Have you seen that Schumer wants to fold the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act into the 2025 defense spending bill? Well, ain't that pertinent? They're one and the same. Literally making it illegal to criticize. Well, this wouldn't make it illegal. I think it would force colleges to do the whole like anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism bit when it comes to disciplining people or suspending or whatever. This is a Democrat. Can anyone explain this? MIC, baby. And by the way, all of this is going to get dropped once things settle down with Israel. It won't be Israel forever. It's going to be some other country, some other issue. It's going to be some other war, whatever. And then in retrospect, people are going to do to this what they did to the Vietnam War or to the Iraq War, which is at the time, the media consolidates. But afterwards, everyone's like, oh yeah, I didn't support that. And they're all going to walk it back, and they, because they'll no longer have their marching orders, and they'll find a new thing. Why does the U.S. government gets control speech if it's at a college? It's because some colleges are government-owned. We should start using Eisenhower's original term, military, industrial, congressional complex. Keeps it clear the government is part of the complex and not separate. Yeah, that's true, 100%. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, passed in the House in May by an overwhelming majority of 320 to 391, would require the Department of Education to use the controversial International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which classifies most anti-Zionism as anti-Semitic when investigating allegations of discrimination. Some top Democrats and Jewish advocacy groups objected to the bill, worrying it could suppress constitutionally protected speech. They did this same thing in with Iraq and with Vietnam as well, by the way. This huge wave of like legislation or attempted legislation trying to censor people for speaking against it, all of which is dropped after the fact and viewed in retrospect as an embarrassment. A lot of previously respected journalists lost a lot of credibility over Iraq, over Vietnam, because they fell in line with it. They're also reintroducing a bill to give the Treasury the ability to shut down nonprofits. Yeah, they really want to get rid of those. You all read about that? They can shut down any nonprofit. They don't even have to say why. It's absolutely insane. It didn't pass though, right? They are going to try again. This bill would give the Treasury nearly unlimited power to destroy nonprofits. It supposedly bans financing terrorism, but that's already illegal. It's really a power grab for the Secretary of the Treasury. Guys, guess who's about to appoint a new Treasury Secretary? Can they start with the churches? They are not an NGO. They have their own legal classification. That's definitely a way to get rid of libraries, LGBTQ safe space. Libraries aren't an NGO. It's getting rid of pro-Palestinian organizations. Advocacy groups. That's what it's getting after. Libraries. You cut funding to get rid of libraries. Sorry, I heard nonprofits. Libraries are also not nonprofits. So Democrats are just going to fall in line like good little centrists? No. They're doing it too. They're not falling in line. They're also doing it. The interests of the MIC extend well beyond like partisan lines. I mean, what was the vote on the last one? HR 6408. 52 to 48. That's great. Would overturning Citizens United help quell MIC sentiments? It would help, but good luck with that. Citizens United will probably never be overturned, not within our lifetime. It really is crazy how blatant they are, you know? With HR 6408, which was initially introduced just after October 7th. Immediately, like, oh, we're going for it, let's go, this is the signal. Anyway, I wonder if they're going to make criticizing stuff like this illegal soon. It wouldn't surprise me. If they do something like that, it would 100% be done within like the purview of defending Israel, because it's, again, like that's the MIC wedge.